Thank you for letting me join you all today. I want to begin by quoting one of our nation's foremost authorities on aging, Blanche from Golden Girls. She expressed what most of us feel when she said, "I don't mind growing older. I just want to look the same." On the other side of the fence regarding that issue was Elizabeth Layton, who said through her many drawings, not only is it okay to be old, it's okay to look old. No one else is telling us that. In her drawings, she drew almost every aspect of aging. She drew what it was like to lose a child. She drew what it was like to have had a stroke. She drew what it was like to realize that at this point in her life, the money had run out, the savings had run out, and her Social Security would no longer pay for her medications. And she drew what it was like to step in someone else's shoes who was facing perhaps racial prejudice. But then she could turn around and draw on a lighter side. She drew what it was like to find the first rose of spring, and then a couple of months later to find the last rose of the season. She drew what it was like to sit beside her husband as they were eating a piece of cherry pie, but they were eating the same piece together, working together in cooperation and in love. Now I want to explain to you Elizabeth Layton, who she was and why she was so important. She was born in 1909 in Wellsville, Kansas, which is a little town about 45 minutes from Kansas City. She was a beautiful child with lots of blonde curls and big green eyes. She came from an established and important family. Her father was the editor of the newspaper. Her mother was a poet. Her mother's twin sister was a professional photographer, which was rare in Kansas in 1915. Elizabeth's great aunt was the book editor for the New York Times. So it was in this family that stressed education for men and for women that Elizabeth was born. But when she graduated from high school, when her parents said, well, it's time for you to go to college. Elizabeth's sister had graduated from Stanford. But Elizabeth rebelled. She didn't want to go to college. That's because she was in love with a man from down the road. What she wanted to do was to get married and have lots of babies and live happily ever after. But her parents were very insistent. She went to college for 2 years, and after that she said, "I've had it. No more college." But her parents and her friends all said, "We don't think you should marry him. He's wild, and we hear he drinks too much." Well, Elizabeth married him anyway, but she hadn't been married for very long before she realized that they were right. But women's choices were few back then, and by that time Elizabeth was pregnant. So she stayed married for 13 years. During that time she had 5 children and at least that many miscarriages. So years later, when the pill came along, Elizabeth was all over it, insisting that her granddaughters knew about it. So when her father died in 1942, Elizabeth packed up the kids and as a single mother moved back to Wellsville to take over his newspaper. She did that. She functioned as a wife and as a mother. Along the way, she had met a wonderful man named Leighton. But even his love was not enough to pull her out of the depression that she kept experiencing. She was treated with 13 electric shock treatments. She finally found therapists once the county mental health center opened, and the therapist prescribed drugs for her like lithium. None of these worked to the extent that she would have wanted. And then something terrible happened in her life. One of her sons died, and she felt grief over his death, as a mother would feel. But she also felt guilt, thinking that maybe she had passed along her depression to her son, and that her ex-husband had passed along his alcoholism to her son. There's a wonderful story about Elizabeth at that time. It was her son's end of life when he was in the hospital, and he was preparing to meet his 5 children for the last time. And Elizabeth wanted to make this as good as possible for him and for his children. And so before the children came in, her son grabbed her arm and said, "Please, Mama." And she did something she deplored. She hated alcoholism. She knew what it had done to her husband and to her son. But she also needed to deal with the situation. And so she had carried in her purse a flask. She spooned him a bit of bourbon so that he could more easily face his children and the end of his life. So after her son's death, she was at the end. She could see no reason to continue living. And then her sister in California, the one who had gone to Stanford, said, "Elizabeth, you have got to do something different with your life. Get out of the house, do something. Why don't you do what I do? Take an art class." And Carolyn had taken an art class every Saturday morning down at the local art center for the blue-haired ladies. And Carolyn wanted to paint pretty pictures of mountains and flowers, and so that's the art course she took. Elizabeth decided to take her sister's advice and take an art course herself. Her sister said, "Do this, and maybe one or the other of us could become the next Grandma Moses." So at the age of 68, Elizabeth found an art course, which was at a small Baptist college 15 miles away. She walked into class. She was 68, overweight, wore her running shoes. Everyone else in the class was 19. The teacher, Pal Wright, was teaching an unusual kind of drawing, which is often taught in beginning art classes. It's called blind contour drawing. Well, let's say I'm going to draw this measuring cup. I would set it down here, and I would make some marks on the paper, and I would soon see that these marks down here look nothing like this. And I would forsake my art career and go watch Golden Girls. But in this technique, blind contour drawing, You don't look at your paper while you draw. You look at the object. So here I would not look at the paper, but I would look at the cup. And as my eye follows the contours of the cup, so does my pencil. So that there's this direct communication from object to brain to pencil. It's an exercise to get people to free up from that idea that they have, oh, I can't draw anything. I can't even draw a stick figure. In this, it doesn't matter because you're not trying to get a pretty product. In this case, the cup. So the teacher said, take your pencil and paper home, draw things at home, draw the front porch swing, draw the salt and pepper shaker, and if you run out of things to draw yourself. So Elizabeth took her teacher's advice. She took her paper and pencil home. She drew the front porch swing. She drew the salt and pepper shaker. And then one evening, her husband, who was the local mayor, he had gone off to crown the homecoming queen, and Elizabeth decided it was time to take her teacher's advice even more. She decided to draw a picture of herself. So she got out her little mirror and looked in the mirror for really the first time ever. Now we all look in the mirror all the time, but this was different. This was concentrating. This was focusing. This was thinking about what she was seeing. What she saw at the age of 68 was not what she wanted to see. She saw these lines across here, these folds here, these bags here, these lines down her face, the fallen chin, the arthritic fingers. But she thought, I've got them. I might as well draw them. And so, looking into the mirror, but not looking at her paper, she drew pictures of herself for 12 hours a day for 6 months. At the end of those 6 months, she realized something had happened. She wasn't depressed anymore. The depression had all come out onto her paper. Now I'll show you what she came up with. Now realize she wanted to do pretty pictures of mountains and flowers. That ain't what she got. This drawing is titled Every Which Way. And it's Elizabeth as she is trying to get the water spout onto the plant that she's holding. But she's not very well coordinated, and so she's missing. The water is going every which way. Now realize Elizabeth did this drawing about a week and a half after she started. So whatever kind of drawing talent was unearthed in this drawing process, it was there in the beginning. A drawing she did about 2 months later is called Thanksgiving. She explained it like this. We women, she said, have done Thanksgiving dinners for 50 years. It takes a week to fix all of these things. So by the time Thanksgiving arrives and all the grandchildren arrive, Granny is exhausted. So in her fantasy, which she has depicted here, she serves Kentucky Fried Chicken, Oreos, and olives. It took her about 20 minutes. And notice that the turkey outside is strutting because he has been saved. Elizabeth drew this drawing depicting her depression. This drawing is called Void. And in it, she is surrounded by darkness, by nothingness. Yet her hand reaches out, hoping that someone might help her. But mostly it's darkness and nothingness. She did a companion drawing, which I don't have with me today, but there are people coming out to help her, to grab that hand. We don't see who these hands belong to, but I would say they might be a therapist, a minister, a friend, and there's even the hand of a dog, because sometimes our pets do help us deal with lots of issues. The next drawing I'll show you is called Capital Punishment. Many of her drawings dealt with social issues, such as capital punishment. She was a strong opponent of capital punishment, and so she drew herself with a noose around her neck. If you could see closely, you would see that on one side of her are a pile of states, meaning that some states which allow capital punishment have put people to death, whereas other states do not allow that. And so it's a kind of unfairness to have this state-by-state option. And you will also notice, if you could see more closely, that the people being given capital punishment have a predominance of being African Americans. Something else she would have said was unfair and not right for our society today. This next drawing is called American Gothic. It's a takeoff on the famous painting by Grant Wood called American Gothic, which is one of the most famous paintings in America, and it's owned by the Art Institute of Chicago. In Grant Wood's famous painting, there is a farmer with his pitchfork and his little wimpy little housewife. She wasn't really a wife, but anyway, she looks like she is in this painting. So Elizabeth did a takeoff, a role reversal. She drew herself as the dominant butch character and her husband as the wimpy little housewife. Many of her drawings deal with their marriage, including this one called Equal. Its other title is The Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is shown in this drawing. The Golden Rule says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," which Elizabeth said was a necessary rule for two people to follow when they're living together and or married. So she drew herself and her husband together. Half is her and half is her husband. They are equal. This idea of equality and the golden rule is shown in the tape measure that is around her neck. It says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Her husband is following the same rule. It's wound up in a tape measure in his pocket. And they are working together to together eat this piece of cherry pie in front of them. This drawing is called Masks. It's Elizabeth in the center, and she is surrounded by the masks that she feels she needs to wear. They are the masks of tragedy, comedy, disappointment, joy, sexuality, many other aspects of our life. but her face is strong in the center of the drawing. You just wonder, why does she need all of these masks? And I think that was her point. She was wondering about that too. In this drawing, Elizabeth has drawn herself as the Winged Victory. That's a famous statue at the Louvre in Paris. So Elizabeth has done a takeoff on that. The original statue in Paris is broken off at the arms and at the head. But in Elizabeth's Winged Victory, she has sprouted arms and a head. She has become complete through her art, I would say. And in the drawing, she has reached the top. She has taken off her running shoes. Her running shoes are Nikes, and Nike is the Greek word for winged victory. So Elizabeth has reached the top, taken off her running shoes, and is ready to fly, which is what Elizabeth did with her life. This drawing is called Buttons, and it's one of her most successful drawings. She has put on her blouse many of the buttons that people have given her over the years. There is the biggest button says, "Seeker of Truth." She thought it was so important in our lives that we continue to seek the truth. At the same time, she was skeptical of people who claim to have found the truth. Other drawings say, "Fat pride, how dare you presume I'd rather be young," civil rights, gay rights, on and on. The causes she felt strongly about. At the end of her life, Elizabeth did drawings about the end of life. In this drawing, she's on a hospital bed, being kept alive by tubes and plugs and respirators. It's not where she wants to be. And she is reaching behind her to pull the plug. But her hands have been tied to the bed rails. She can't reach the plug. The title of this drawing is Pulling the Plug. So she did immediately after that a companion drawing called A Natural Death. And instead of tubes and plugs and respirators, there are the hands of a friend spooning her a bit of water. It's not a pretty picture either, but Elizabeth said in this drawing that at least here the woman has been given a choice. This is the last drawing that I'll show you today. It's called The Magic Gate. The Magic Gate is that final gate, the one that separates us from where we have been to where we're going next, wherever that is. So behind Elizabeth is her life, her children, her job, all sorts of things representing her life are behind her. I am there carrying around a stack of her drawings, and she prepares to make that final step, leaving behind whatever was back there and proceeding with whatever comes next. She's not telling us what comes next. Now I want to talk a little bit about how I came to know Elizabeth Layton. It's strange to me at this point that I am now at the age she was when she started drawing. So I am now facing these wrinkles here, these sags here, these lines, this falling chin and arthritic fingers, all the things I said she was facing when she started drawing. I now have them myself. So I was a 27-year-old newspaper reporter in Ottawa, Kansas, where she was taking her first and only art course. And I was always looking for something good to write about, a new story. I had just written a story about someone's pet duck. So I was at the bottom of my efforts to find something good to write about. And I wandered into the student union, and there, amidst the muddy still lifes done by the college freshman drawing students, I was once a college freshman art student. I know what those works look like. They were muddy, not done very well. But there were two very strange drawings. They were of an old woman. Her big green eyes looked at me. I looked back. I was smitten. I was enthralled at the beginning. I ran to find the teacher and I said, "Who did those drawings of the old woman?" He said, "They're done by Grandma Leighton. She's 68 years old and taking her first art course." I said, "Well, are they good?" And he said, "Beats me." But I knew that they were. And that if they had spoken to me so strongly, they would affect others equally strongly. And so I knew automatically that my mission would be to get those drawings out. So I called her and told her I wanted to write a story about her. She said, "No, I don't think so." But a week later she called and said I could write a story about her drawings, but not about her. So I drove to Wellsville. A funny thing happened on the way to Wellsville. In Wellsville, there are no house numbers because everybody knows where everybody else lives. But she was afraid I couldn't find her house, so she got out her bucket of black paint and painted 3, 4, 5 in big letters so I could find her house. Once inside, she showed me drawing after drawing that were under the bed and in the closet. I said, "Why don't you have any of your drawings hanging in your house?" She said, "Oh no," she said, "they're too ugly." And I said, "I think that they're beautiful." So I loaded 10 of her drawings in the back seat of my Volkswagen and went to my newspaper office and hung the drawings around. And I had everyone on the newspaper staff come and look at these drawings. I said, "Aren't they beautiful?" And everyone said, "No, they're not. These are sick and depressing. And who would want to look at pictures of an old woman anyway?" So I arranged for her first one-person show at the local library. The librarian said she was not too keen on hanging these drawings. She thought they were disturbing. And of course she said, "Well, who would want to look at pictures of an old woman?" And then I wrote the first story about her, which appeared in my newspaper. And a week later, I got a call from the librarian. She said, "Well, I still don't like those drawings, but other people do. As a result of your story, people are coming to the library whom I've never seen here before. They stay for hours. They laugh, they cry, they go get their neighbors. So if it's okay with you, we want to keep this exhibit for a while longer." Then my effort was to show these drawings to a wider audience, and I hooked up with a couple of organizations that toured art And eventually, of course, at first they said, well, who would want to look at pictures of an old woman? But eventually they said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And they put together an exhibit of 30 of her self-portrait drawings, ones like you saw a few minutes ago. The exhibit was a great success. It went to 200 art museums and art centers all across the country. Most notably, the Smithsonian. And that happened 1 year before her death. My being a journalist was helpful in this promotion of her work. I was able to place her stories in Life, People, Parade, Good Morning America, and on and on. She did more than 1,000 drawings in her 15-year art career. She gave them all away. As she said, art saved my life. I don't want to get greedy with this gift, this miracle. So instead of selling her drawings, she gave them away. She gave them to friends and art museums, and she gave many to charity auctions to benefit the arts and mental health and women's issues and on and on. So in that way, felt like her drawings were very specifically helping other people and other causes. Elizabeth said that there was nothing special about her drawings, that anybody could do it. Anybody could pick up a mirror and draw himself or herself in the mirror. I'm not sure of that, but Elizabeth said that it's important to get outside yourself and come to understand yourself as you are aging. There are all sorts of changes. The body has changed, the mind has changed, but she said, it doesn't matter. This is where we are today. Elizabeth Layton continued to draw until she had a stroke, which resulted in her death. But what she said to me on her deathbed was, yes, she had prepared herself for the idea of death, but she wasn't quite ready. She still had more to do. That more to do, I have concluded, is my continuing to get her exhibits organized and to continue to talk about her to groups like yours.